0218 hours. 40,000 feet above the mountains of Isfahan, the radiation sensors aboard a WC-135R Constant Phoenix begin to scream. The needles slam into the red. The air out here, where there should be nothing but high desert wind and starlight, is thick with uranium particles. Something underground is breathing poison into the sky. And then the mountain answers. A hidden hatch on a ridgeline splits open and a Sayed. 3 missile erupts from solid rock, cold launched, climbing at 3,000 miles an hour. There is no radar warning, no chirp, no tone, just a heat-seeking eye locked onto the 4 engines of a defenseless 320,000-pound spy plane. The Constant Phoenix throws itself into a violent bank. Its airframe groans, rivets popping, wings flexing past every limit the engineers ever drew. In the escort slot, an F-15E Strike Eagle catches the thermal flash and reacts before the pilot can even finish a thought. An AIM 9X Sidewinder rips off the rail. It crosses the gap in a heartbeat and smashes into the Sayed just 500 feet from the spy plane's wingtip. The blast wave hammers the WC-135R like a fist, shattering the rear windows, blowing out cabin pressure, masks dropping, men gasping, and the mountain fires again. 3 more missiles are already climbing into the dark. Here is what the people on board understood in that instant. This was never one missile. This was a kill box switched on with them standing in the middle of it. Buried under 200 feet of granite sat the reason for all of it. 18 lead cylinders of weapons, grade uranium that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps had sworn did not exist. If those cylinders stayed in that mountain, the region tipped toward a war nobody could walk back. If America came to take them, every man, every aircraft, every billion-dollar hull had to survive a fortress that had spent months learning exactly how to kill them. So the Pentagon faced a problem with no clean answer. How do you break into a mountain that refuses to show you where its guns are, a mountain that has gone completely, deliberately silent? The USS Abraham Lincoln did not wait for a permission slip. While the Constant Phoenix was still wallowing toward the coast on bleeding hydraulics, the carrier was already swinging her bow into the wind. 4 F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters howled off the deck, the most expensive, most invisible tools in the entire American arsenal. But as they crossed the Iranian coastline, the pilots flew straight into a puzzle nobody had trained them for. Normally, a fighter hears the enemy before it sees him. The threat receiver picks up the chirp of a hunting radar and paints a warning on the helmet visor. Tonight, the screens were dead. The sky was silent. And that silence was the whole plan. The IRGC knew they could never win a high-tech radar duel against Aegis and the F-35, so they did something brutally simple. They turned their radars off. For months, they'd carpeted the ridgelines with Chinese-built passive infrared cameras, giant telescopes that see heat instead of light. These sensors emit nothing, so the Lightning II had nothing to listen for. While the Americans hunted for a signal that would never come, the Iranians simply watched the friction heat of the jets scorching against the cold stratosphere. Then there was the matter of the fortress itself. They called the trick the salami. Every night for months, ordinary dump trucks shaved a few inches of rock off the mountain and hauled it away, a sliver at a time, too small for any satellite to notice. They told the world they were repairing a road. They were actually clearing tunnel mouths America believed were sealed. They painted the massive steel blast doors to match the gray granite exactly, so that from 20,000 feet, a fortified launch hatch looked like nothing more than a natural landslide. Heat cameras for eyes, a whole mountain for armor, no emissions to track, no radar to jam, no obvious target to strike. That was why the Guard was confident. They had not built a wall. They had built a blind spot, and they had invited the most advanced Air Force on Earth to walk into it. Then the silent mountain blinked. On the lead F-35C's visor, a single flash bloomed off a jagged ridge. A hidden hatch slid back, and a Sayed 4 came out of the ground, and this one was a monster. It didn't chase, it lofted, climbing dead vertical past 70,000 feet into the thin air of the stratosphere, hunting for altitude. It wanted to get above the stealth fighter and fall on it like a hawk dropping on a rabbit. The pilot slammed the stick sideways and pulled 9 Gs. Picture 9 copies of yourself stacked on your chest. His vision washed to gray and started draining black at the edges as blood was wrung out of his skull, and he grunted and clenched his gut just to stay conscious. He kicked out a miniature air-launched decoy, a tiny jet-powered drone shouting, "I'm the fat target, shoot me." But the Bavar 373 battery on the ridge was smarter than that. Its processor weighed the heat of the jet against the heat of the decoy, threw out the cheap answer, and stayed locked on the pilot's engine. The only way out was to put the eye out. He cracked his internal weapons bay and he could hold it open for barely a second because that open door lights up like a flare to an infrared sensor and erases his stealth entirely. 2 AGM-88G missiles dropped clear and lit, retasked tonight to home on heat instead of radar, accelerating to 3,000 miles an hour in the blink of an eye. The Iranians fired shield interceptors to swat them down. The first AGM-88 took a direct hit and became a ball of orange fire that lit the whole valley like a struck match. The second one threaded the smoke. It hammered into the mast that carried the heat cameras, and 150 pounds of warhead detonated into thousands of tungsten cubes that shredded the optics into scrap. The mountain's long eye went dark. If you'd want this crew flying top cover for you, you already know what to do down below, because the instant those cameras died, the IRGC stopped aiming and started panicking. Dozens of smaller Cordad 1.5 batteries buried inside the salami spoil piles woke up and began firing in every direction at once. Not at targets, they couldn't see targets anymore, but straight up, building a wall of steel in the sky to wall the jets out. The 4 Lightning IIs danced through a forest of fire, ripping flares, hauling high G brakes, their engines thundering down the canyons like a storm trapped between the rocks. The eye was out, but the uranium and the men guarding it were still deep inside the granite. So the US Navy stopped probing and switched to saturation. You do not send one missile at a fortress, you drown it. From the deck of the USS Gravely, 40 BGM-109 Tomahawks erupted from the vertical launch cells in a rolling wall of flame, $2 million each, every warhead the size of a refrigerator. The Tomahawk is a terrain hugger. It dropped to 100 feet off the desert floor at 550 miles an hour and slithered along the bends of the valleys, riding the dirt to stay under the Iranian sensors. The Guard was waiting. Their point defense net came alive. Mirsad, 1.6 batteries hidden in the spoil piles, built for short, vicious kills. As the Tomahawks rounded the last bend toward Isfahan, the valley detonated. The interceptors launched in pairs at 2,000 miles an hour. A lead Tomahawk took one through the engine and its fuel tank tore open into a fireball that rolled across the canyon floor. Another caught shrapnel across the wing, spiraled out of control, and slammed into a ridge, kicking off a landslide. So, the Americans answered with their own ghosts. A wave of the Tomahawks carried no explosives at all, only electronic noisemakers, sacrificial decoys flying straight into the heart of the defenses to soak up Mirsad rounds. Every interceptor spent killing a phantom was one not available to kill the real thing. Was there a more cold-blooded math anywhere in this fight? Then, a true Tomahawk punched through the smoke, wove past a ridge, and found a ventilation shaft feeding the underground bunker. Its hardened nose drilled the outer rock, and 1,000 pounds of explosive woke up underneath the mountain. Across the valley, 4 more arrived together on the IRGC's Mobile Command Center trucks, antennas, launch crews, and the whole thing vaporized in a string of orange flashes that played out in under 3 seconds. The Guard's iron wall was cracking wide open, but the uranium still sat under 200 feet of solid rock, and to reach it, America needed something far, far heavier. 0309 hours. High above the wreckage, where the clouds thinned into nothing, a B-2 Spirit loitered in the black, a giant flying wing that simply did not exist on any radar screen. In its belly sat the answer to the mountain, a GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, 30,000 pounds. The size of a minivan, the weight of 2 grown African elephants, forged from one of the hardest steel alloys on Earth. It isn't really a bomb, it's a gravity-powered drill. The Spirit cycled its bay doors, and 15 tons of steel rolled out into the dark and began to fall. But the Guard had saved one last card. Tucked in the mouth of a deep cave, the Tomahawks never touched sat a battery of Syad. 2 interceptors fast, agile, and aimed not at any aircraft, but at the bomb itself. Kill the GBU 57 inches midair, and the mountain lives. Two Sayad, 2S screamed out of the cave, locked onto the enormous heat the penetrator threw off as it accelerated through the thin air. Two F-35Cs rolled in from 40,000 feet and dove, engines firewalled, the airframe shrieking as they tore past 1,200 miles an hour. The lead pilot loosed an aim, 9X. It crossed the gap, its heat-seeking eye fixed on the exhaust of the climbing interceptor, and the first Sayad, 2 disintegrated into a cloud of glowing scrap 2,000 feet from the falling bomb. The second was still closing seconds from contact. No time for another shot, so the second F-35C did the only thing left. It flew its own jet directly across the interceptor's flight path and dumped a massive curtain of flares. The Sayad seeker drowned in the sudden wall of fire, confused, and swerved at the last possible instant, missing the GBU 5-7 by less than 50 feet before it burst harmlessly in the empty sky. The penetrator was clear. It struck the crown of the Isfahan Massif at 700 miles an hour and bored through 200 feet of solid rock in under a second. When it finally detonated, the entire mountain flinched. Deep in the tunnels, the lights died, the floors split, and the Salami Fortress stopped being a fortress and became a tomb. The blast tore open a jagged breach, a crack the retrieval teams could now climb into. The mountain was broken open at last. The IRGC, however, had no intention of surrendering it quietly. 0352 hours. As a flight of MH-47G Chinooks dropped toward the smoking breach, the sky above the mountain turned into a graveyard of fire. The Guard fired everything it had left fading: 110 ballistic missiles and Fajr, 5 heavy rockets, dozens of them, arcing over the peaks toward the one patch of air where the helicopters had to hover. A wall of steel built to shred their thin skins. 40 miles out, the USS Gravely came awake. Her Aegis combat system, a supercomputer tracking 100 targets at once, emptied a volley of SM-6 missiles into the night, 3,000 miles an hour, fast enough to cross the whole Isfahan range in under 2 minutes. They met the incoming rockets every few seconds. No luck involved, no drama, just the cold arithmetic of guided steel smashing guided steel out of the sky. Closer in, RIM 162 ESSMs streaked up from the valley floor to swat a Fajr, 500 yards off the lead Chinook's nose. The shockwave rattled the rotors, but the umbrella held. Under that cover, the teams finished the job, dragging 18 lead cylinders of uranium through the smoke on robotic carts and up into the helicopters. The Guard threw one last cold launch, Sayad, 3 volley at the retreating Chinooks, and an F-35C caught the thermal flash and flooded the sky with electronic noise until the missiles lost their lock and wandered off into the desert. The Chinooks pulled pitch, dropped into the deep canyons, and vanished behind the rock. The uranium was gone. The mountain was a ruin. The fortress that hid from emissions had been emptied by a force that carried a bigger hammer and a stronger shield. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. For 15 minutes during that fight, every radio went dead. The granite and the narrow canyons swallowed the signals whole, and the fleet had no idea whether the ground team was alive. So a ship fired an SM 6 inches, a high arc over the peaks, not at anything. While that missile coasted through space at 3,000 miles an hour, it became a satellite for 90 seconds, catching the team's faint radio call and bouncing it back to the carrier. The most lethal interceptor in the world killed no one that night. It worked as a very fast, very expensive mirror in the sky, a cell tower for one phone call. And without it, those helicopters never would have known when to come in. The hardest mountain doesn't fall to the biggest bomb. It falls to the side that outthinks it. What would you have done with that one missile, and would you have trusted it? Drop your call in the comments, hit subscribe if this crew earned it, and stand your watch with us. This was a fictional dramatization built on real hardware and very real tensions, a war game, not a forecast.